talk about this, but let's stop and actually think about how our writing can potentially change big chunks of society and the way that we go about things. Feminists and feminist writers challenge the traditional power of men in patriarchy and revalue and celebrate the roles of women. It's not about women necessarily being in power over men. So I just want you to understand that nuance. Feminists, true feminists, it's not about women dominating men. It's about equality. It's just about finding a place where finally women and men are treated equally. And unfortunately, we are still a patriarchal society. We like to think that we have equal rights to men, but we don't yet. Not really, not overall. There's a lot of changes. We are moving away from men being in all the power, but the reality is that men, if you look at any political party, if you look at any positions of power in society, men overwhelmingly dominate power positions. And there is still so much inherent devaluing of women in society. It's very hard to really see that women have equal rights yet. Yeah, and look at the US, Liz is just saying, and look at the US, how women's rights are being eroded. Please come off mute if you want to talk about this now. If anyone wants to speak up, you are more than welcome to come off mute.
Yeah, for me, I think it's horrifying to look at what's happening in the US, where, you know, really feminism made so many strides. It was American feminists that, you know, like Betty Friedan and Simone de Beauvoir, and that, like, you know, in across Europe, across the US, and like Kelly just pointed out, in Ireland, where it's interesting that, because abortion is now legal in Ireland now, isn't it? I think
they're allowed to travel for it, so then not punished to go to England anymore, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So it's interesting how in different countries how it's shifting and changing, but
very, very highly patriarchal religions that are dominating entire countries. That's sorry.
Yeah. Oh no, but then I was just going to say, but then in Australia, I mean, I don't want to dwell on it because it's awful. And it's not the reason for this class, but like what happened with Lily James this week, which has shone a lot light back on actually the issues Australia still has in terms of patriarchy and the way that women are treated, and that Australia itself has so many problems still when it comes to the kind of safety and equity of women. It's so far to go.
And it is a really good platform to then branch out into all areas. Obviously, Liz, you're a huge advocate for shining a light on disability and many other things, you know, inclusivity, and, you know, racism. There's so many elements to this, but much of which we can draw back to patriarchal society. Why is prejudice so inherent in the human condition? So all these things are very important to think about as writers. And it's not that every writer needs to be an activist. You know, I'm certainly not an activist writer, but we can be implicit activists in the way that we go about our writing. Does that make sense? We can be implicit, sort of very subtle in the ways that we convey messages when we start to become aware of the power that we hold. I am so excited to be talking to Elizabeth Wright today, one of my heart writers, who is also a speaker, an ABC news reporter, and Paralympian. Liz, welcome to the Heart Writing Podcast.
Hi, Rose. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
We're actually sitting on my daybed right now in sunny Avoca Beach. So we've got this beautiful view of all the trees in front of us. It's probably a perfect place for us to chill out today and have a chat.
100%. And I just love the sound of the ocean in the background as well. It's so relaxing.
Oh, I'm just so glad we can do this today. Finally, this is not your first speaking gig, obviously. You know, you've been doing a lot in your life, and the fact that you get to present on ABC, create your own stories on ABC. You've been in the limelight a lot in your life too with your Paralympian career. You've worked as a writer, you've had your own business. I'm just amazed at how much you've achieved. You're probably one of my most prolific writers that I have in heart writing, which is pretty incredible. You're using one hand and you're using a hand that also doesn't have 5 fingers. So
no, exactly. By my poor left hand, I tend to forget that that's been impacted by my limb difference as well. So I am missing a finger, and my thumb and one of my fingers is joined together. And but I can type. I do type using my short arm as well. But I do type slower than, I guess, your average two-handed person.
Are you sure you type slower? Because you get through a lot of words. I mean, I can't believe how many words you can hand in, you know, per fortnight. It's incredible. So I think it is you're very inspiring to a lot of people and a lot of writers. There's a lot of writers out there that have a lot of excuses, and you don't let those excuses get in your way.
No, well, I think for me, because I've always been such a creative person, even when I was a kid, so alongside my swimming, I had sketchbooks like piled so high. I love drawing. I love creating my own comics. I remember even in year 6, I used to go around and do caricatures of people and charge them 50 cents to like buy their caricature. So I've always been kind of, I guess, entrepreneurial and creative, especially when it comes to writing. I have this story in my head and I just want to get it out. And so, you know, I tend to sit down thinking, okay, I'm just going to write 500 words today, and then before I know it, it's 1,000 words in, because I've just gotten sucked into the story and it's playing out in my head, and I'm just trying to get the words down as quick as I physically can to get that story out.
You're writing your very own dystopian fiction novel in heart writing at the moment. You actually joined heart writing. You didn't know that you wanted to write a book. Well, you knew that you wanted to write a book, but you didn't know what you were going to write before you started. And all of a sudden, you know, a year later, maybe just over a year later, you've now got this book absolutely flying. You know, it's interesting because it's a long process. It's a long game. We both know that you can drum out a non-fiction book in like a couple of weeks, really. I know you've done that before. I've done that before. But a novel is really a long game. It's really not for the faint-hearted. And this book is so well on its way to publication. I'm so proud of you. Before we get on to that, though, could you please tell us about how you got into Paralympic sports? Mm-hmm. And I want to hear a little bit about your limb difference.
Yeah, sure. So when I was born, my disability was labelled limb deficiency. Interesting, I know that we've spoken before about linguistics and language that we use, but I call it limb difference because I, by all means, don't see my missing limbs as making me deficient in any way. Yeah, I was born, as the doctors called it, with limb deficiency, meaning that I'm missing half my right leg and half my right arm. And I wear a prosthetic leg. I got my first prosthetic leg when I was about 2.5 years old, and I learned how to walk, and that really changed my life. Like, I'm a massive, massive advocate for mobility aids. I think, you know, they've got the short end of the deal for too long these days. I think people should absolutely celebrate mobility aids and what they actually do for people, because, you know, my prosthetic leg, I wouldn't live without it. It gives me mobility. It allows me to get out into the community, out into life, and experience things and achieve things. So yeah, and obviously, as you mentioned, one of those things that I have achieved is reaching that status of Paralympian. So, you know, I've just praised my prosthetic leg to high heavens, but one thing I will say is that from when I was a kid, I absolutely loved being in water. And the reason that I loved being in water was because it really gave me a sense of freedom. in water, the best way I can explain it to people is that, on land I can't do handstands or somersaults or anything like that. And I'm sure that a lot of people, a lot of adults will say, well, I can't do that anymore either. But the point is, when you're a kid, you ask any kid, most kids can do like handstands and cartwheels and all stuff like that. I couldn't do that as a child, but in water I could actually do all of those things. So for me, from when I was really little, water was just freedom. And it was really from that I just really fell in love with swimming. I went to my first swimming school carnival in year 6, and I asked the teachers if I could compete because I wanted to have a go. And I think that really kick-started this love affair with swimming. So at the age of 13, it was announced that Sydney had won the right to host the 2000 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And I remember turning to my parents and saying to them, I'm going to swim at those games. And they kind of laughed, and I ended up applying for the maternity cover role as National Disability Affairs reporter for the absolutely wonderful Naz Campanella, and I got the job. And I think, I don't have a journalism degree. I'd never done broadcasting before, but the ABC saw something in me. I saw something in the ABC and within myself that I could do this job. And I won that role. And then, Naz is now back. The wonderful Naz is now back at the ABC, and I've now moved across to ABC Sport, which I really feel like has brought me full circle back to those sporting roots, which is really exciting, especially with it being an Olympic and Paralympic year. I get to tell sports stories, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah, so inspiring. I mean, throughout Heart Writing, we've been hearing little stories about, your job at the ABC, where we've all been listening, just so excited for, everything that's unfolding there. And as you climb the ranks, it's just incredible.
So my dystopian literary fiction story is really exploring this side of things. It's set about approximately 10 years from now. In Sydney, there's 2 main characters, Sarah, who's a journalist, and Monet Gray, who's the biggest influencer the world has ever seen. So the reason I mention Kim Kardashian is I want you to imagine this character as being Kim Kardashian on steroids. So it's not just hundreds of millions of followers Monet has. They have billions of followers. It's this just you can't even fathom. And this one character has so much influence over the world that culturally we live in this very bland world. Everything's white or grey or cream. Colour isn't fashionable anymore. It's very influenced by this Monet Gray character. And Sarah, the journalist, she has a lot of issue with this. I guess you could say Sarah is almost an avatar for myself, exploring the issues around this extreme influencer culture and late stage capitalism and what that actually means for us as people and human beings. I will talk about the challenge of Monet, of writing Monet as well, and I'm glad that Monet is coming across so effortlessly because my pronouns are she, her. I identify as a woman, but Monet Gray is non-binary, and I have a number of non-binary friends, and I really want to do them justice with this character. So that is a bit of a challenge for myself to ensure that I am writing this character with a great deal of sensitivity and awareness. And I certainly know that once I get to the end of this process, I would love to have a sensitivity reader who is non-binary to read this and ensure that I'm getting this character as authentically represented as possible. For me, maybe some of the hardest points of writing this has been knowing I have these plot points I need to reach, and maybe it's just those bridging spaces of how am I getting there. I've got my plot points, but I'm intuitively writing it as well. But I think what I'm finding fun with the intuitive stuff is that there's moments of these characters that are popping up for me that are a real surprise to me. So I've actually just written a scene which you'll read in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, goody.
That I surprised even myself, but I love this little scene, and it's not a particularly big plot point. It wasn't in my plan, but it just kind of came out of me, and I remember sitting there going, oh, okay, I didn't expect that of Monet. okay, that's interesting. How are we going to deal with that?
I'm very intrigued now.
Like, yeah, with their relationship with their significant other. It's okay, and maybe something big is going to come from that. So, you know, it's kind of nice, I think, to have a bit of that structure there to give, you know, it's certainly given me that direction to follow. I kind of am starting to understand where I want this story to end. But then allowing myself that space to be creative and free flow is allowing maybe some character plot points to pop up that are just unexpected but are actually really strong in the story.
And then you've still got space to tweak things later, you know, to fit into the ups and downs of plot development so that we are compelled at the right places. You don't have to get all of that right in the first draft.
No.
You can just keep drafting, like you said before, polishing.
Having gone back and read through my initial first few chapters a few weeks ago, I can still see that it's good, but I can see already where it's like, oh, okay, I can maybe shorten that bit, or I need to add a little bit more information or context in here, or actually that's not working anymore, or maybe the characterization of Sarah's changed a bit. Maybe I need to go back to the beginning and just make a few changes to the way I'm writing her character in the story. So I'm starting to see already, but I'm just setting that aside for now and continuing on. I just want to get through this story knowing that I can come back and make those changes.
2 years ago, I saw Hanya Yanagihara speak at the Sydney Writers' Festival, and someone asked her in the audience, Hanya, what makes you think you can write about two gay men when you are not a gay man? And she said back to the audience, an author can write whatever they want to write. How does that resonate for you?
It's something, especially because I think I've been in the disability activism scene for quite a long time. Certainly in the UK, I was very much in those discussions about, you know, authenticity of voice. You know, who can talk about with authority the experience of disability, for example? Who with authority can talk about the experience of the LGBTQ community? It's something that I've struggled with a lot because I think certainly, I think if you're going to write a character that has lived experience so different from your own, I think you can't just go in there completely blind to understanding what that experience is like. Because no one could ever understand 100% what living with limb difference is like and write about. And to be fair, actually, a few months ago I read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, and I knew that there was a character in there who has a prosthetic leg, and he loses his leg, and I wasn't 100% comfortable with the way that Gabrielle wrote this character and the way that she dealt with amputation or limb difference. But at the same time, I had to recognise within myself that, or I have my experience with limb difference, and I was born with my disability, and she's writing a character who acquires his disability. He goes through this whole depression about it and all of this stuff, which I've never felt depression about my limb difference before. I've never felt that's not what my anxiety at all is about. So I kind of found it really hard to connect with that. But I had to remind myself, but actually that is the lived experience for a number of people who are amputees, who have maybe acquired their disability, and they might read this book and actually really identify with this character. So I think when it comes to writing about characters who have such extreme different lived experience to yourself, I think again it's just coming back to writing with sensitivity. I think as a creative person you have to have that freedom to write from these different perspectives. Otherwise we might not have the diversity that we do have in books and movies and things like that. But I still think we just have to be aware that we have to do it with sensitivity and consult. Just talk to people, expand your friendship group, expand your network, and make sure that you're including people who are Black, brown, disabled, part of the LGBTQ community. You know, not just for your writing, but actually for that richness of humanity that you get from having friendships with people from different parts of life.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, people might question, oh, but you haven't got a character in your book with limb difference or disability, but you're choosing to focus on a different minority group. But I think that you've already got this natural sensitivity, and it's all about the research. It's all about having conversations with people. Because if we went down that path that you can only write about what you know, you can only write about what you've experienced, that means that you're writing books that are just about you forever. And that's totally taking that imagination and even the spiritual world out of creativity. If we go back, back to ancient shamanism, people were having dreams that were not based on real life experiences at all. Things were coming into them. At the moment, I'm really going deep at the moment because, I'm doing this course on decolonization and ancestral connections. And I'm having to do these meditations where I'm laying down and I'm having to call in my ancestors who I've never met before. And I'm seeing them and visualizing them. And, it's just taking my approach to a whole new level of where our creativity can go. What else is possible?
Well, I think 100%. And I think when you take that spiritual approach, it actually increases your empathy as well. I may have a disability and I can understand disability from my perspective, but I'm not a monolith of disability. I don't know everyone's experience. I don't know everyone's access needs. I don't know how to make the world more inclusive and welcoming and a sense of belonging for every single disabled person out there. Same as I don't know how to do that for members from the LGBTQ community or people who are black or people who are brown. We can't know everything, but I think it's about being open-minded to every human lived experience and not judging it, seeing the beauty in it actually, and the love. I mean, fundamentally, at the end of the day, I think it's really beautiful to connect with people on that level and to really listen to them and get to know their history. And I think it's the same for any marginalised group. It's about recognising and respecting that person's culture, lived experience, and giving them the opportunity to be heard and really listen to them.
Yeah, absolutely. This brings me back to that session with Hanya Yanagihara. She was right, authors can write what they want. But, as long as they're sensitive, as long as they're researched, as long as they're bringing it back to their why, is there a grander purpose here? And to be honest, I loved Hanya's story. I think that she went with an inspiration that she felt very drawn to. And in the end, she didn't really care what everyone thought about her. This was the story that was burning at her soul that needed to be told. And gosh, look at how far this book went. There were raving fans in that audience. People were clutching their book. This book is huge. It's one of the biggest books I've ever seen. But it had real voice. It had a rhythm that I had not seen in a long time in a book. And she was driven to write from the heart. So, props to her for just going for it, even though she probably knew that she might be criticised. But there are so many people out there who stop themselves from doing it because they're so afraid of what everyone's going to think. And I think that we're at a great risk of that. I mean, so many people that come to heart writing, one of the first things they say to me is, oh, but I'm petrified and I've got massive imposter syndrome. Now, we've talked about that a lot. It's an ongoing discussion with every one of my students. I feel like my job is mostly to motivate people to believe in themselves.
Which you do a good job of, right?
But I think that we need that, because if you keep up with that monologue, that really toxic monologue of, but I shouldn't do this because everyone's going to be upset with me, then no creative act will ever come into fruition.